Are we starting on first?
Yeah, we're starting.
All right.
That's what we keep telling.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Mr. Rodriguez, and I represent Mill Valley High School today. I believe that we're starting?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if you guys are ready.
We're totally ready.
All right.
With the affirmative.
All right, thank you. Charles Darwin once said that free will is to mind what chance is to matter. And Francis Crick said that science has shown you that you, your joys and your sorrows, your memories and your ambitions, your sense of identity and free will are in fact no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. Today's round, I will define science, and I will address the issue that is resolved, that science leaves no space for free will. According to Webster's New Collier Dictionary, the definition of science is knowledge attained through study or practice, knowledge covering general truths of the operation of general laws, as obtained and tested through scientific methods and concerned with the physical world. However, what does that really mean? Now, science refers to a system of acquiring knowledge. This system uses observation and experimentation to describe and explain a natural phenomenon. The term science also refers to the organized body of knowledge people have gained using that system. Less formally, the word science often describes any systematic field of study or the knowledge gained from it. I chose to use the less formal definition of science, and for the rest of the debate, I will use science to mean any systematic field or study of knowledge gained from it. Cross-apply the fact that this is my argument that free will is a philosophical term of art for a particular sort of capacity of rational agents to choose a course of action from among various alternatives. Therefore, I will present three main reasons to affirm this resolution. First, free will doesn't exist separately. It is in fact part of science. Second, when you use free will, you are using science. And third, the use of this debate as a scientific method proving free will is part of science. I'd like to first cross-apply the fact, by definition, free will is choosing from various alternatives, which is exactly the same as what you do with the scientific method. Therefore, we are in effect, by offering this debate today, actually proving my point. We are arguing two different aspects of the same position. We've had free will to argue about something else, but we chose to argue it this way. Why? Simply because free will doesn't really exist separately. It is a part of science. Now, science itself must be an agnostic on the issue. We can interpret scientific theory and combine it with philosophical inquiry to attack the problem. Free will cannot even be coherently defined, let alone justified, which goes on to my argument. Now, second, when you use free will, making rational choices from among alternatives are not using the scientific method or a cost-benefit analysis. You had a choice in which you were to school today. However, you had a limited choice, and you made up your mind through the variables you had available. Now, when it comes down, science is like looking around with a telescope. And when it comes to free will is simply thinking about being in the middle of the ocean and trying to figure out whether you are standing on a ship or on an island. However, in order to come up to that decision, we have to go through a process of science. Now, third, how can free will prove science? That is because scientific method requires that you use rational thinking between various variables. In essence, in a full 100% argumentation, the fact is clear. Free will is an essential aspect of what we can call science. We make a hypothesis and then we test the hypothesis. This is exactly the same as the definition of free will. Therefore, cross-apply that free will is in essence a part of the scientific method. Your idea of free will would be unlimited choices, not limited variables. Now, my opponent could have chosen to stay home today, or they could have decided to argue about another subject. They didn't, and since they are here, and since they are arguing against me today, we have to look at the fact that they indeed made that decision through science. Now, let's assume the underlying mechanics beneath the brain are irrelevant, and the interactions within the brain are important. At this scope, your thoughts are the result of interactions in the brain. Your senses are inputs to the brain in the form of nerve impulses, and your actions are outputs from the brain in the form of more nerve impulses, which will move muscles. A system like this has to prove that free will does not exist. Our brain processes those inputs and creates a model of the world, updates that model, and evaluates how different actions may affect it. In short, it thinks. Basically, definition of learning. Now, actually, common sense and logic dismisses free will before science does. If there is will, it has to be about something. So it cannot be free from any of the gazillion interactions and constraints that connect us to something, to the creature with the will. Free will is a fat oxymoron. It is safe to say that free will and determinism are perhaps the two most problematic ideas ever. However, it is a fact, indeed, that in order to have free will, it must go through science. Now, as far back as the ancient Greeks, people have wondered how humans seem to have the ability to make their own personal decisions in a manner of lacking any casual component other than their desire to will something. But Cashmore, a professor of biology in the University of Pennsylvania, says that many biologists today still cling to the idea of free will and reject the idea that we are simply conscious machines completely controlled by a combination of our chemistry and our external environmental forces. Now, when it comes to free will, as I explained in my first contention, free will is simply a philosophy. It's part of an art. When it comes to philosophy, it's a belief. A belief is derived from a thought, and a thought is made through our neural impulses. So therefore, that just proves that, again, it's nothing more than a belief that comes from a thought, and a thought is not complete unless a neural impulse is first fired. So in order for it to even happen in the first place, we have to have had a thought that was completed. And in order for a thought to be completed, we have to go through science and, of course, our anatomy. Now, for these reasons, I'd like to present forward my case, and if there are no questions, I will retire. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I guess Gunit will state our opening. Introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Gunit, and I'm going to be the first speaker, and I'm going to introduce our opening statements. Okay. Free will is the ability of an individual to act on the basis of his or her reasoning about what to do in a given situation. We should be counted as having free will if we have the ability to act on the basis of our reasoning about what to do. Our view is the rational deliberation view. If we can identify cases where we are aware of consciously deliberating about what to do, weighing our reasons for and against a particular action, considering alternatives, and ultimately deciding what to do, and we're able to say that this is a conscious deliberation was the basis of our performing the action that we decided to perform, then we count as having free will on this view. When we weigh all our alternatives, consequences for doing something, and our reasons for doing or not doing it, and gather all that information to make a decision, we are using free will. For example, when choosing a time to do an assignment, one considers their alternatives, doing it right away, or waiting until the day before, and their consequences. In this case, having more time to complete the assignment or having less time, and also their reasons. After this, the individual makes a decision based on the situation, showing that he or she is practicing his or her free will. One might, of course, argue that somebody else has acted as an external force. For example, let's say that a teacher had told the student that he must complete the assignment or there will be consequences. One could say that because the teacher told the student that it wasn't really the student's free will, but can we truly account the student's choice to do or not to do the homework based on the teacher's influence as an external force? Of course not. The student was still presented with the choice of addressing the ultimatum and doing his homework, or ignoring it and facing the consequences. In the end, he really did use his free will to make his own decision, and the teacher's influence does not completely affect the individual's choice. We use free will to help decide a course of action to fulfill a desire that follows our own personal values. It can also be thought that we use free will based on our rational nature, even if it conflicts with our evolutionary instincts. Rational nature can be described as the ability to do something worth pursuing or valuable to themselves, even if it leaves no room for the individual to achieve their more evolutionary satisfaction or pleasure. To say that all human behavior is explained by science and leaves no room for free will is to say that all human needs and instincts, such as survival and reproduction, are something that they must do and have no choice over. However, to say that is quite incorrect because there are still people all over the world opposing those basic instincts. Suicides still happen. There are people who choose not to reproduce or opt for birth control, and there are people who smoke or do drugs, despite the knowledge that they are an obstruction to their survival. Over 1 million people lose their lives to suicide worldwide each year. The global suicide rate is 16 per 100,000 population. The point is, these types of decisions contradict humans' evolutionary drives, survival, and reproduction. So humans regularly show that science does have room for free will, because otherwise they wouldn't have been able to make those decisions. Furthermore, the advancement of humans from their primal state is itself proof of free will's existence, because without free will, they would not have made much attempt to change themselves to become what we are today. Another example is the famous debate about the right to end one's own life. Some people want to have the choice to end their lives, which goes against their evolutionary drives. Survival. This shows that those drives do leave room for free will, or people would not have considered or debated the acceptance of this right. With this in mind, we can also say that free will is the ability of a person to control themselves and their actions. For example, when one really wishes to do something like watch TV or play video games, they still do try to control that urge because of their own free will. This further shows that they themselves choose their course of action, and that self-control can be a form of free will. Furthermore, the basis of good science is falsifiable. Facts must have a certain character whereby they could be proved mistaken in the same way that they can be ascertained, although experimentation or structured reasoning. So, the idea that science leaves no room for free will always leaves room for skepticism, the cornerstone for good science. Through our previous and following remarks on science, we argue that science leaving no room for free will is not only falsifiable, but in fact false. One of the more common scientific arguments against the possibility of free will is that human brains function largely based on chemical reactions. This leads us to believe that our brains work similarly to a computer, systematic and determined. Therefore, do we, as humans, also function systematically and determinedly? We could argue that this is a fallacy of composition. Just because our brain functions are determined does not mean that we do not have free will. Referring back to our definition of free will, we have free will if we have the ability to make decisions based on our reasoning in any given situation. Our brain will determine a reason, but we can decide to act upon that reasoning or not, or even act irrationally, as we often do. It may be argued that humans are only a material substance, like a computer, and that our consciousness is also determined. All of a computer's intelligence relies on its CPU, also known as the brain of the computer. Similarly, all of our decisions must rely on the brain, which works systematically like a CPU. In this case, our decision of whether or not to act based on a given reason is also determined. Therefore, even if our decisions are created systematically, do we still have free will? Yes. A human brain is tremendously more complex than a CPU. Our brain has the ability to function by itself, while a CPU does not. Moreover, a brain can make decisions in ways that cannot be replicated by a computer, like intuition or emotions, which could partially be irrational. One might even argue that since CPUs are creations of humans, that their determined and systematic nature reflect the human mind being determined, but this is also not the case. We, as humans, have yet to replicate the full spectrum of decision-making that humans engage in, especially in terms of consciousness and using our decision-making to advance as a species. Computers may be able to learn of their own account, but not in the way that humans use free will to learn. And it is this type of learning and deciding that leads us to the concept of compatibilism. The famous anthropologist Daniel Dennett has argued that we are more than the sum of our individual parts, which means that we have more control over our actions in comparison to our system's bodily functions, or even how a computer might work. Free will is compatible with determinism. This is, as Daniel emphasizes, does not say that our actions are not determined, but shows that they aren't inevitable. In other words, how people choose to avoid a particular thing by anticipating this occurrence to prevent it from happening is an expression of free will. Free will is our capacity to see probable futures that seem like they're going to happen, so that in time we take steps so that something else happens instead, as he said. Dennett elaborates on the fact that you cannot change the future or the past, but can change what you thought the future would have been, which correlates back to the actions taken for avoidance. Furthermore, people are not deluded by our own sense of capacity, but we are determined to be the masters of our fate. This means that everyone, every day, is choosing, deciding how their day will be based on the precautionary actions taken in reaction to a certain thing or action.
Okay, so that concludes Ganit's opening remarks. So I assume we now move into question period, which the affirmation gets the first question.
Okay. Is free will unlimited, yes or no?
Free will is not unlimited, but saying that free will is unlimited would be a very unrealistic thing because there's still other factors. However, the fact that free will is limited does not make it.
You said, you answered no, right? You said that free will is not unlimited?
Yes.
And your contention is that it would be unrealistic to answer no, or?
Yes.
Okay. Now you also talked about how character drives us, and we are masters of our own fate, correct?
Yes.
Character falls and is basically defined by our DNA, right? Right. So if our DNA is really what makes up a lot of our behaviors and our cognitive processes, wouldn't you say that that DNA is part of science? Yes or no?
DNA is a part of science, but I would like to bring our attention to the fact that science itself is falsifiable. So what we know about the DNA right now our knowledge of the DNA might increase in the future, right? So the fact that science itself is falsifiable actually shows the existence of free will, that it can exist, and that science does leave room for it.
Well, however, you answered the question, and you said that that character is made up by our DNA, correct?
Yes.
So therefore, if it's made up by our DNA is made up of a lot of acids, and really it's just a bunch of atoms together, correct? Now, when it comes to thoughts and beliefs, we're looking at simply how can I word this? What is your definition of free will?
Our definition of free will is the rational deliberation view. It is that if we can identify cases where we're consciously deliberating about what to do by considering alternatives and ultimately deciding, then we're known as using free will.
However, you contended that it's that we choose what we're doing, correct?
Yes.
And you also agreed with my second point in regards to how our thoughts are processed through brain, and they're simply impulses that keep on allowing ideas to go through, right?
Yes. So the main thing I would like to bring our attention to is the composition fallacy. So by saying that our brain is that what our brain is made up of doesn't completely contribute to all our reasons for free will. So what you're saying is that all our brain okay, how do I word this? So you're saying that all our assets may affect all our decisions, but our actions are more than the sum of our parts, right? So
I've never said that. However, you did agree to my second point when you talked about how our actions are, they go through our body processes in which they're simply inputs, right? You agreed to it in the last question I asked?
Yes, I think your time is up.
Okay, guys, you? Sorry.
I think it's your turn for questions.
Yeah, I don't know, Mike, do we want to go past the 3-minute mark on the
Well, probably today, maybe not till the end. Let's just go to the second speech.
Okay.
Okay. Then we'll do a question afterwards. Go ahead.
Now, there have been
Okay, cool.
There have been a lot of contentions when it comes to what is free will. Now, free will, by definition, must be unlimited, and it has to be free. So by limiting free will, you have to be taken into your assertion that free will simply has to follow under science. Now, when it comes to whether or not we are masters of our fate or we have the capacity to choose our decisions, it's nothing more than free will is nothing more than a philosophy. It dates back to the Greeks, the ancient Greeks, and the ancient Greeks related it to vitalism, in which they said that it was a belief that there are forces governing the biological world. However, when it comes down to the biological world, it's simply a belief that's derived from a thought. And if it's a belief that's derived from a thought, then it clearly shows that science is there. As in order for a thought to be processed, the neural impulse has to be completed to its full extent, and the thought has to be thought of first before the action can be done. So that being said, there's no way that you can have a choice out of nowhere. The thought has to come from your character. And when it comes down to character, character goes and follows our DNA structures. And based off of our behavior and cognitive processes, that's when our character is made. And from our character, we can character is basically what defines us as a person, but it goes back to our DNA. So when it goes back to our DNA, all of the inputs and all of the impulses are never really done on its own. It's based off our experiences and our social social cultural influences around us. Now, there have been 5 major logical fallacies today. There has been the shift of burden, in which my opponent would have somehow have you believe that you are projecting to the future and that we are singular on our own, that there's somewhere, somehow, the ability to come up with a thought and make our own choices. They describe, for example, a student that would be asked to turn a paper in, and whether the student turned it in or not was basically an example of free will. That is actually not true. A student makes a decision based upon cognitive processes and what they understand. So when it comes down to what the work that they will provide, basically, it goes back down to our cognitive processes, and our cognitive processes go back to our thoughts, in which we are basically just done inputs. And another logical fallacy that has been done today has been the cause and effect. They have done this by making free will a cause and not the effect. They are describing it as a variable instead of actually looking at the fact that, by definition, free will has to be unlimited. Because if we were to limit free will, and let's say that it did exist, there had to be somewhere, somehow, a beginning. And if it's unlimited, as the opponent answered in the previous question, then they are going against their own point. Now on to the second logical fallacy. There was the appeal to history. Since history is all we can really go by, the future has not really been of issue here. We have to instead look at science. We are basically made up of science. All we are is a bag of molecules in which we basically process our thoughts. And if we go on to what Cashmore, a professor at Pennsylvania University, said, he said that if we go back to ancient Greek, people have a wonder how humans see and how they have the ability to make their own personal decisions. The thing is that we don't have that ability. It's simply a thought process that goes into our neural science. And free will is akin to religious beliefs. Since then, neither complies with the laws of the physical world. And one of the basic premises of biology and biochemistry is that biological systems are nothing more than a bag of chemicals that obey chemical and physical laws. That is simply all that we are. Generally, we have no problem with the bag of chemicals notion when it comes to bacteria, plants, and similar entities like us. Why? Because that's just the way our brain processes information. Now, science itself must be an agnostic on the issue. We can interpret scientific theory and combine it with the philosophical inquiry. And again, free will is nothing more than a philosophy. Philosophy cannot fit under any terms on its own. It has to have the backup of science. And that being said, I mean, philosophy falls under science, and therefore it has to fit under science in order for it to be counted or addressed. Now, if every interaction of atoms and particles is predetermined, then would that mean that there is no free will? Now, if the interactions are random, does this randomness mean that we will that is any more free, or perhaps our free will should influence this interaction somehow? Frankly, I don't find this to be that useful when it comes down to the questioning of science and free will. Free will is simply a contention that falls under our decision making based off our cognitive processes and the way that our brain is able to impulse the inputs as we are driven by learning, which learning is simply the process that and the causes and effect and reactions that we change after an experience. And we pray that you vote for us because, again, by definition, free will cannot be free will does not fit anywhere by itself because, again, it's a philosophy, and philosophy falls under science. And as definition follows, the philosophy is simply a religious belief. A belief is derived from a thought, and a thought is processed through our brain and cognitive processes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We're gonna, Aiden, you're gonna conduct a rebuttal speech, and then we'll go to question period.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so hi, my name is Aiden. So one thing I noticed a lot when you were talking in your initial speech, begin with?
Louder and slower.
Got you. One thing that I noticed in your first statement is that you began by saying that free will doesn't exist in, okay, sorry, first debate. Anyways, so what you were saying is that science leaves no room for free will. And yet at the beginning of your first statement, your opening, was that, yeah, free will doesn't exist without science. And yeah, it's no more than a behavior that is dictated by molecules and chemical reactions. You mentioned a lot of cognitive processes, which are, yeah, scientifically provable things. They are processes that within the brain are justifiable and detectable. So I guess what I'm just trying to draw attention to is that that isn't inherently not free will. You are pointing out a process and defining it by science. And I see that, yes. But I don't see how that leaves no room for free will. I don't see how saying that cognitive functions and cognitive processes being established is really a way to predict all behavior. So character dictates behavior is another thing that you brought up. And I'd also like to point out that character is not DNA. DNA is things about our biology that determines more or less how we look. Our experiences is what happens after birth and after DNA is formed. So I don't, I guess, see how that can be attributed to free will when a definitive science or creation of someone's being, such as DNA, is, yeah. Behavior is formed after DNA, as I said again. And yeah, past experiences will affect our later choices, but our choices aren't inherently formed upon those experiences alone. So, sorry. Reaction is just perceiving rather than sending signals. Sorry. The Lebet. Oh yeah. The Lebet experience or experiments. The Lebet experiment was something that I did a little bit of research upon, and it was a experiment that the brain will only make a decision spontaneously to within a certain amount of time. The experiment was someone was set up with a mouse to click whenever they felt the will to, and it was supposed to be spontaneous. The people participating within this experiment were asked to remain spontaneous and not plan ahead when on the clock that they were watching to click. However, I see that there's a little bit of a flaw within that. Judging free will upon a spontaneous act is not accurate way to judge free will. Spontaneous events means, or spontaneous choices means a choice that is made without as much thought as would normally be put into a decision. So a decision can be made for more large things, things that people have to think more upon. People put lots of thought into a lot of decisions. However, what was the name of the experiments? Lebet. Yeah. It's rather inaccurate how they chose to judge free will in that experiment. They are judging two kind of behaviors and responses to a situation. Spontaneity and judgment and decision making are two completely different things. So when the people who are in that experiment are asked to remain spontaneous, that to me seems like they are not actually looking for decision making. So I feel like a lot of experiments and kind of measurements of free will and decision making are not made with long-term, I guess, thinking and planning and response in mind. So I do not see how science can say that there is no way for me to have free will, for me to make a decision. If I want to, I don't know, I want to save up money and I want to buy a car. I can decide that I want to save up more money for a more expensive car that might last me longer, or I can decide to save up money less over a shorter period of time to buy something more short-term. And it is up to me to decide which one will be more worth it, which one will serve me better. If I chose the long-term solution, then that would mean that I am choosing over my initial want to not have to wait as long, or save up as much money, have a little bit more spending, is I'm repressing my own desires to perhaps spend it on, I don't know, a snack or something like that. Something that I just kind of instinctively and spontaneously feel like I want. Free will and that kind of judgment goes beyond just spontaneity. They are not the same thing.
I'm good.
I think so.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so that concludes Aiden's rebuttal. So we'll give the floor, obviously, to the affirmative. You guys have the first question, and Aiden will respond. Go ahead.
So the first speaker answered a question in the previous round, and they answered that free will was limited, right? Because otherwise it would be impossible to figure out what free will is, right?
Right.
All right. Well, if you are limiting free will, then it's not really free. Yes or no?
So I guess what you're asking is, or what you're posing is that free will.
A simply yes or no question.
It shouldn't. Okay. Sorry. I would say no. Free will acts within boundaries, certainly, but it
So
is.
then it's not free will then, correct?
Okay.
If it's limited and it cannot, and if it has to be set in boundaries, then it's not free will.
Free
Correct.
will. But there are multiple
Well,
situations.
there must be multiple, but again, if you were to cross-apply all of the following contentions that were unaddressed in your first and second speech regarding my contention on how free will, by definition, had to be free or unlimited in order to be free, and how you contradicted yourself by answering that, no, it was not free and it had to be limited, then it's not really free, correct?
No, I'd say that free will can exist within a set number of outcomes or decisions.
Well, those decisions have a limit, so then therefore they're not free.
They're limited decisions, but I can still choose to go down different paths.
They're choices that are based off of your neural impulses, correct?
Yes.
So then they're not free. They're being limited by whatever comes into your brain based on your experiences.
By my past experience, that's learning. Yes.
Yeah, and your experiences are limited indeed. So then therefore they're not free. Correct? So science, so therefore you can agree that science is what rules and limits those choices, correct?
I'd say that science dictates definitely what goes on in a person's brain.
Okay. And again, you said that it was a choice, and those choices are, where do those choices come from, if not from the brain, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you have any questions?
Yeah, you should ask a question. Yeah.
Did I have any questions? Oh, yeah. I don't know. I was just a little bit confused about the whole DNA upon character that you brought up earlier. I wanted a little bit more elaboration on that. I was slightly confused.
Sorry. Well, basically, my contention was that DNA, yes, it does make up what we look like, but it also makes up who we are. It has been seen several times in psychology and sociology that DNA can affect our character development and, of course, our thoughts based off of our social cultural influences and our biopsychological influences. In other words, our biology. Now, as I defined in one of my previous contentions, biology does step in, and biology says that, that since our system is simply controlled by our brain is basically the most important out of our body. And without our brain, we wouldn't be able to think. Our DNA is able to send our DNA basically influences our choices based on the interactions that we have, and again, the influences that we experience throughout our lifetime. Now, DNA comes in, of course, because it can handle our temper, it can handle our the way we socialize, the way we behave. It has been proven by psychologists in the previous studies that DNA does influence our behavior and the way that we learn and react to things. Does that clear up your?
Yeah, to a degree. I just heard a lot of like it can and in many instances will. But what about the instances where it does not dictate behavior, does not dictate learning?
DNA has to dictate behavior, because DNA is basically what we're made out of. It's not just eye color, it's not just hair color, it's not just chromosomes. It's our material. It's basically who we are. So our DNA influences a large part of basically what we do, what we think, and how we interpret things based off of our cognitive processes.
Time. Let's go to our third speech.
Yeah, for sure. So Affirmative is going to do their consolidation, I assume?
All right. Now, I'd like to end this debate by saying that we should, what? Oh, is it okay?
We have two.
Hey, sorry, you guys are still muted.
Oh, sorry.
Where did you go? Sorry about that.
Okay. So when it comes down to the last two rounds, I'd like to address the fact that my opponent hasn't really addressed any of my major contentions. They tried to make me look like I negated myself. However, my first contention was indeed that free will doesn't exist separately, but it is a part of science. I'd like to make that clear. I'm not trying to say that free will is impossible. I'm just trying to say that free will exists, but it's influenced, of course, by science. It can't be on its own. Second, when you use free will, you are indeed using science. And third, the use of this debate as a scientific method is proving free will, and the better my opponent argues, the more they prove my point. Now, when it comes down to logic and debating and individuals' level of responsibility, the reality is that none of us can just have the decision spontaneously. It has to come down from our ideas and the thought processes. Again, going back to my last two contentions, I mentioned that indeed all of our thoughts are processed through our neuroscience. And psychiatrists and other experts on human behavior have been involved in initial judicial proceedings, and they have found that they can determine whether or not people can truly have any kind of issues when it comes to free will. And free will has always been proven to be a part of science. And if we go on into how we can prove science, that is because scientific method requires that you use rational thinking between various variables. Indeed, the opposing counsel has been referring to many variables, and they have indeed admitted that free will has to be limited. So therefore, it's not really free. So by seeing that it's not really free, we're clearly seeing that it's not free will. If it has to be limited, then it shows that it can be limited. And of course, it's based off of science and what science influences us to think and how we process thought. Now, there's no other, like the rational and the moral thought, again, influenced by science, would be that there was no other vote rather than the affirmative today. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Alondra is going to conduct the consolidation speech at this time.
Hi, oh wait, is this Alondra?
Can she hear us? Yeah. Can you hear us, sir? Oh, I don't know. You guys can hear us?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Okay, good. Go.
Okay, hi, I am Alondra. So first of all, I'd like to say that.
Louder.
First of all, I'd like to say that free will does not coincide with science, and that we actually, when we view free will with the rational deliberation view, first of all, free will is the ability to act on the basis of our reasoning, and free will is used when we weigh all our alternatives, determine our consequences, and gather enough information to make a decision, which makes it free will. And for example, as Vinny previously said, when you choose, say a student has been given an assignment, they can choose whether or not to do the assignment or not. But it can also be said that a teacher is forcing the student and not giving them any free will. But the student is still choosing what to do. They can choose whether or not they finish it or they don't finish it. They can also choose whether or not to do the assignment well or not put any effort on it as well. I'd also like to talk about the time when you said that free will, it can't be free if it's limited. That's a false dilemma, because free will is limited, but the definition of free is you still can make your own choices, pretty much. And free will, even though we have limited choices, we can still make a choice, despite how limited choices. We aren't forced to make a decision. We aren't forced to make a decision. I'd also like to talk about human evolution. You say that we do not have free will, right? Wait, you said it coincided with science, but that doesn't make sense, as humans' natural nature is to survive and reproduce. However, we do choose to not go against that, as many people take birth control, they do drugs, and drink alcohol, as well as commit suicide. As Gunit previously said, that there's so a lot of people who choose to do it. I can't remember. Yeah. I think that's it.
Okay. All right. Okay. So yeah, one more question period, I guess, is done at this point. So
I don't think it's a question. Goes straight to the reason why you won.
So, sorry, the 2-minute one at the end?
Yeah, I had 2-minute ones at the end. Why you won, sort of summary, the very last summary.
Yeah, of course. Affirmative, do you want to go first, or?
Yeah, I think we're supposed to go first, and you guys get last.
All right.
Okay, so yeah, we'll yield the floor then for 2 minutes to the affirmative to carry on with their last speech.
Okay. Today's round becomes clearly down to these 3 major points. Now, again, onto my first 3 contentions. Free will doesn't exist separately. It is, in fact, a part of science. Second, when we use free will, you're using science. And third, the use of this debate as a scientific method is proving free will as part of science. Now, the opponent mentioned and tried to redefine free will as the ability to come to choices based on reasoning. Reasoning is simply thoughts. And again, whether it be conscious or unconscious, both of those make us aware of our actions, and it gives us the sense that we can control them. However, this awareness is not really, it doesn't really exist. It's simply an illusion. Just because we are often aware of multiple paths to take, that doesn't mean that we actually get to choose one of them based on our own free will. The ancient Greeks asked by what mechanism would we be choosing. Now, the physical world is made off of causes and effects. Nothing comes from nothing. So therefore, their contention that, again, you have free will is limited, and free will the opponent mentioned that you can pretty much make up your choices. It simply falls back to my definition of how free will, by definition, has to be free or unlimited. So therefore, listen to what each of us have said. Use your judgment and you will vote for the best person. The problem is that it has to be one of us. It cannot or should not be a third or a fourth party. Why? That is because we do not really have free will. You have a choice. You have a choice to make the correct decision. I ask that you consider this fact and vote for the person who made the most sense, turn their case, and show that the judge in the end has only one decision. To vote for one of us on the resolution, thereby proving my point that science leaves no room for free will. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Gunit's now going to conduct our final consolidation speech. Go ahead, Gunit.
Okay, so for the consolidation speech, I would like to restate some of our arguments. One of our main ones was the evolution and how we sometimes oppose our evolutionary instincts, and I don't think that was ever really regarded by the opposition. So, although you, as you said, that DNA affects our character, there's still chances when, for example, by committing suicide or like choosing not to have children, we do change those scientific instincts, our evolutionary instincts. So that is something that you should that should be considered when saying that DNA affects our character, because we do still sometimes oppose our DNA in terms of committing suicide and opposing our basic evolutionary instincts like survival and reproduction. And also, you said that free will has to be unlimited to exist or to actually be considered free. However, that's not true, because even if we do have limited choices, we still have choices, and we still have the free will to choose from those limited choices. So that is what the true definition of free will is. Not free will. Just because free will is unlimited does not mean that it doesn't exist or it's not compatible with science.
Is that it?
Yes.
Okay. So that's it. So I guess that would be the conclusion of our position there. And yeah, that is it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry, I didn't know there was a. Oh.